No sons, no daughters, not a single grandchild. There was only me, Gloria Waverly, standing silently beside the casket in the chapel grounds at Bonaventure Cemetery, as cold winds off the Savannah River cut through the air, so sharp it felt as though even the weather did not wish to stay and witness this scene. The funeral director looked visibly uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting toward the rows of empty seats and then back to me, as if waiting for me to speak on behalf of an entire absent family. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Mrs. Waverly, would you like us to wait a few more minutes?" "No," I replied, my voice strangely calm. "Begin." Calvin would have hated delays. He hated them even in the final days of his life. Taking his medication on time, watching the evening news at precisely 6, lining up his slippers neatly beside the bed before sleeping. He was a man of discipline, a man of habit, a man of dignity, and now he was a man being buried alone. I took a seat in the front row. The 5 chairs around me were empty. The pastor read from the Bible in an even, emotionless tone. The wreaths were overly vibrant. The casket was polished enough to reflect the light. I couldn't stop thinking that Calvin would have scoffed at all that ceremony. Then he would have looked around, frowned, and asked, in that familiar voice of his, "Where are the kids?" Where were they? A text message had arrived that morning. My son, Damien, sent me exactly one line. "Sorry, Mom, something came up. I can't make it." No explanation, no phone call. I pictured him, most likely on a golf course with clients, laughing over new contracts, pretending that today carried no weight at all, pretending that his father's death was just another item on a crowded schedule. My daughter, Ariana, didn't even text. 2 days earlier, she had left me a voicemail, her voice light and relaxed, almost carefree. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment. You know how stressed I get when I have to rearrange my schedule. Tell Dad I'll come see him next week, okay?" Next week? As if the dead could wait. After the service, I walked quietly behind the pallbearers. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't in pain. I had been grieving for months. But because there is a kind of sorrow so deep, it no longer spills outward. It sits inside you, heavy as an anchor. And on that day, I had already been buried beneath it for a long time. The cemetery was nearly empty. An elderly groundskeeper stood in the distance, leaning on his shovel. The casket was lowered. Prayers were murmured. Earth touched wood. Wood met silence. I stayed long after everyone had left. My heels sank slightly into the damp soil. The wind slipped through my coat, numbing my skin. The official headstone would be placed later. For now, there was only a small, simple marker with his name engraved. Calvin Waverly, beloved husband, loving father. I stopped at the word father. A single word echoed in my mind, clear and sharp, like a pebble trapped in a shoe. Forgotten. When I returned home, the silence roared through every room. Calvin's armchair was still there. His slippers were lined up perfectly. The TV remote lay exactly where he had last placed it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I went into the kitchen, opened a good bottle of wine, the kind I always saved for guests, and poured myself a glass. I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. I wasn't someone who scrolled through social media often, but in that moment, something compelled me to look. Ariana's page was public. She had posted 2 hours earlier, a photo with 3 friends, cocktails in hand, all smiling brightly. Brunch with the girls, bottomless mimosas, living our best life. I scrolled. Damien had posted as well. A photo at the 9th hole of a golf course. His new club gleamed in the sunlight. "Great swing, perfect weather, closed a few solid deals." I stared at the screen until everything blurred. Then I turned off the phone, took another sip of wine, and looked at the photograph on the wall, Calvin and me at our 40th wedding anniversary, standing beside the rose bushes he had planted himself. They had once bloomed a brilliant red. Now they were bare. Tomorrow, I thought, I will call the lawyer. I would change everything, quietly, decisively, with the same dignity Calvin had lived by. Because if I was the only one who came to see him off, then I would also be the only one to carry out his final wishes. and theirs. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, the place where Calvin used to peel apples with the precision of a surgeon, slicing them into thin crescent shapes and arranging them neatly on a plate. He always gave me the best piece. The sunniest slice, he used to call it. Now the fruit basket sat untouched. A few overripe pears were slowly collapsing under their own skins. Silence was no stranger. Calvin had passed nearly 2 weeks before the funeral, and that time had begun to teach me the shape of loneliness. But tonight, it pressed down heavier, louder, more cruelly. I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chairs, about Ariana's message, or rather, its absence. I had raised a daughter who could sip cocktails while her father was being lowered into the ground. Had I failed her? Or had she failed something within herself? Something that could no longer be repaired. Damien's message was still there. No punctuation, no warmth. Just a flat refusal in black letters on a white screen. Something came up. Was that shame? Indifference? Or that unconscious cruelty people only recognize when it's already too late? I poured another glass of wine, not because I was sad, but because I was suddenly very clear. I walked down the hallway into our bedroom and opened the top drawer of Calvin's desk. Everything was arranged just as he had always kept it. Envelopes, spare keys, an old stamp album. I reached behind the files and pulled out a thin, neat folder bound with a rubber band. The label read, Estate. Inside were copies of our wills, beneficiary lists, instructions for the house, the car, the accounts, even the antique watch Calvin's grandfather had brought over from Dublin. Everything had been prepared 2 years earlier, with love and long-range planning. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the file. Damien was listed as a co-beneficiary of the main investment account, the account holding nearly $300,000 accumulated over a lifetime of work and saving. Damien and Ariana were both named in the transfer clause for the house. Even the lakeside cabin, where they no longer visited but always asked about at tax time, was reserved for them. I held the papers in my hands. My fingers trembled. Not from age, from something deeper. Betrayal has a pulse, and I could hear it pounding in my ears. I stood up, opened the closet, and pulled out a canvas storage box. Inside were old photographs, birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, Calvin holding the children when they were small, me smiling on the porch, Ariana tugging at my sleeve, Damien asleep against Calvin's chest, a book left open across him. We had once been a family, and perhaps I had been too naive to notice how far that family had drifted. Maybe love doesn't shatter in storms. Maybe it just fades, like wallpaper left in the sun, quietly, until one day you no longer recognize the pattern. I picked up a photo of Calvin and Damien fishing. Damien was about 12 then. Calvin had an arm around his shoulders, pointing at the water, his smile full and gentle. That man deserved more than an empty chapel. I set the photo down. Then I picked up my phone. It was nearly midnight. I didn't care. I called Randall Price, our attorney. It went to voicemail. I left a message anyway. Randall, this is Gloria Waverly. I need to revise the will, urgently. Call me back in the morning. I ended the call and stood by the window for a long time. Moonlight touched the rose bushes in the garden. They had begun to wilt after Calvin's death, not from neglect, but as if they too were grieving. I knew I should prune them, give them a chance to bloom again. But not tonight. Tonight, I let the old petals fall. Tomorrow, I would begin cutting away what no longer belonged to me. What I didn't know was that this decision, made in silence, would soon unleash the most violent confrontations of my life with my own children. The filing cabinet in the hallway had 3 drawers. On each one, Calvin had affixed labels in his steady block letters: property, taxes, family. The last drawer was mine. I opened it slowly. The metal creaked, as if the cabinet itself were reluctant to release the ghost stored inside. There were dozens of folders, receipts, check copies, bank letters, old Christmas cards tucked among loan agreements. I had kept everything, not out of obsession, but because I believed in clarity. Paperwork doesn't lie, And that drawer held enough truth to burn down a forest. I sat at the kitchen table, set aside the folder labeled Damien, Education and Business, and opened Ariana, Property and Lifestyle. The handwriting was mine. Neater back then, but still clear now, clear enough to reread every line, like rereading the years of my own life. I began. A $15,000 check, dated 2003. Ariana's wedding. Ariana had said, "Just something small, Mom. I only want a nice venue." But that nice venue came with crystal chandeliers, lobster and butter sauce, a full string quartet, a wire transfer of $7,800, 2007. "The roof is leaking, Mom. The baby's crib is soaked." I transferred the money within an hour. $12,000, 2011. New braces for Malcolm, $5,000, 2013. "I want to send him to a summer robotics camp, Mom. It's a big deal." A year later, Ariana called me crying because her husband had been laid off. I sent another $20,000, no questions asked. "You always save us, Mom," Ariana whispered over the phone. "We don't know what we'd do without you." And I believed her. Damien's folder was even thicker. $25,000, seed money for a startup Damien called a sure thing, which collapsed in less than 6 months. Calvin warned me not to send it. I sent it anyway. Then came a used car, a down payment, 3 semesters of graduate school. I paid hospital bills when Damien's second daughter was born. I paid insurance when the first broke her arm. Once, Damien owed back taxes. I wrote the check and told no one. Looking at it all now, line by line, number by number, page by page, I wondered, when, exactly, had I become their safety net? Or maybe it had always been that way. I had simply been too willing to wrap myself around their falls, as if that were the only reason I had been born. Not once did they ever refuse my help. But they refused to come say goodbye to their father, and that was something paperwork couldn't fix. That was when I realized something strange. This drawer didn't just contain money. It held a record of imbalance, where I always gave first, carried first, apologized first, in exchange for promises as light as air. I didn't need more proof to know Damien and Ariana had forgotten Calvin. I needed proof to understand when they had forgotten me, and the answer lay in the one envelope I had never dared to open. That envelope bore the name Malcolm. I returned the files to the cabinet except for one. I kept the envelope marked Malcolm. Inside was a handwritten note Malcolm had written at age 11, smudged pencil folded in half. "Grandma Gloria, thank you for teaching me how to make pancakes. I think you are very smart and fun. One day I will take care of you the way you take care of me." I held the note for a long time. Malcolm was 19 now. I didn't know if he remembered writing it. I didn't know whether the promise still meant anything to him, but to me, it did. I had always believed I needed to be fair. Divide everything equally. That's what people say. Be fair. Don't play favorites. But then I asked myself, what if fairness isn't sameness? What if fairness means giving your legacy to the one person who sees you, not as a bank, but as a human being? Calvin used to say, "A legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you leave it to." I once thought he was talking about money. Now I understood. He wasn't. The call came in the late afternoon. A voice I hadn't heard in months. Gentle, almost hesitant. "Grandma?" I closed the ledger in front of me. I had been reviewing utility bills, preparing to shut off services at the lakeside cabin, where Damien never went, but always called an asset. It wasn't an asset anymore, at least, not Damien's. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Are you okay?" There was a pause, then Malcolm spoke. I heard about Grandpa. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner." I waited, not to punish him, but because I needed to hear whether what came next was sincere. "I didn't know he had passed until 2 days ago," Malcolm said quickly. "Mom never told me. She just said he was sick, not that he was gone." I sat very still. "He passed almost 3 weeks ago, Malcolm." "I know," Malcolm whispered. "I'm sorry." For a moment, no one spoke. In Malcolm's silence, there was something, not quite guilt, but grief. Real grief. The kind you can't fake. "I want to come see you," Malcolm added. "If that's okay." I exhaled. "Of course it is." Malcolm arrived an hour later, taller than I remembered. His beard slightly unkempt. He smelled of clean clothes and tension, the scent of someone trying to hold it together during days that aren't okay. He hugged me the way young people do when they're unsure they're still welcome. One arm at first, tentative, then tighter, fuller, when he realized I wasn't pulling away, and I didn't pull away. We sat in the living room. I poured lemonade for Malcolm. He looked around the house as if everything were both familiar and strange. I thought that was what grief felt like, recognizing every object, every corner, but knowing it no longer belonged to the same world. "I missed Grandpa's funeral," Malcolm said, "and I'll never forgive myself for that." "You weren't the one who chose to miss it," I said gently. Malcolm looked at me then, truly looked. "Mom, she really didn't come?" I nodded once. Malcolm said nothing. He just lowered his gaze to the coaster beneath his glass, his thumb slowly tracing its frayed edge. "Mom said they had to work," Malcolm said after a moment, "that everything had been taken care of." "Now you know." Malcolm straightened, as if a switch had flipped inside him. "I want to do something," he said. "For Grandpa, for you, anything." "You already are," I replied. "You're here." But Malcolm still looked unconvinced, as if being here wasn't enough to make up for what he'd lost. I hesitated. Then I stood and returned with a manila envelope. Inside were trust documents, unsigned, unfiled, but entirely real. I hadn't taken them to the bank yet. I wanted to see Malcolm's face first. I handed the folder to him. Malcolm opened it, frowned, read a few lines. Then he looked up at me, confused. "Grandma, what is this?" "My plan," I said simply. Malcolm read more, his voice beginning to shake. "This is everything. The house, the cabin, even the savings accounts." "Yes." "But why me?" Malcolm asked, his voice breaking. "Why not Mom or Uncle Damien?" I could have said 100 things about their absence, their cruelty, their parties and excuses so familiar they meant nothing anymore. But I chose a different truth, a simple one, a true one that needed no argument. "Because you were the only one who came back, without being called." Malcolm stared at the papers, then set them down gently, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just remember who you are, and remember what love looks like when it's real." Malcolm's eyes filled. He wiped them with his sleeve, the awkward way he used to when he was little and didn't want anyone to see him cry. We sat like that for a long time, saying nothing more, just being present. The way Calvin and I used to sit each evening, two people who didn't need to fill the air with sound to feel close. As Malcolm was about to leave, he turned back at the door. "If I come next weekend, can we make pancakes again?" I smiled, fully and gently, for the first time in days. "Of course," I said. "We'll use the good syrup." After Malcolm left, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the last light of day fade through the moss-draped oak trees of Savannah. Outside, the rose bushes were nearly bare, only a few last petals clinging on. I thought about the note Malcolm had written at 11, about the hug tonight, the real one, not rushed or polite, about the way Malcolm said, "One day I'll take care of you." Malcolm hadn't said those things for an inheritance. Malcolm said them because he saw me. I stood, went into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. There was still some soup I had made the day before, real soup, not canned. I warmed a small bowl and carried it to the dining table. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't eat standing at the sink. I sat down, I lit a candle. And I ate dinner alone, but not lonely. There is a difference. Ariana showed up the next morning. I knew she would come, not because she missed me, not because she needed a hug or a word of comfort, but because I had stopped replying to her messages. Ariana couldn't stand losing control, and silence to her had always been a kind of challenge. She arrived without warning. Her black SUV shot into the driveway too fast, the tires grinding over the gravel with a screech, like she was late for something more important than me. She didn't knock. She walked straight in the way she always had, like this house still belonged to her in some invisible way. "Mom," Ariana said, dropping her oversized handbag onto the hall table. "I've been trying to reach you." I didn't stand. I was folding laundry, slowly, carefully, pairing socks together, as if it were the most important task in the world. Sometimes you need a small task to keep yourself from breaking. "I'm busy," I said. Ariana gave a small snort, as if that answer were ridiculous. "Busy with what?" I didn't respond. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water without asking, and leaned against the counter like she owned the whole house. "So," she said, her voice shifting into something cold and clipped. "Is it true?" I looked at her. "What are you talking about?" Ariana tapped her nails against the side of the glass. "Malcolm said you're changing the will." I finished folding a shirt and placed it neatly into the basket. "Yes." "To cut me and Damien out." "Yes." Ariana let out a laugh. Short, dry, bitter. "Are you serious? After everything we've done for you?" "Everything you've done?" I raised my head, my hands still. "You didn't come to your father's funeral, Ariana. You didn't send flowers. You didn't call. You didn't even ask how I was." Ariana opened her mouth as if by reflex, then said the exact thing she believed would make her sound more reasonable. "I had a nail appointment." "Yes," I cut her off. "Nails and then brunch. I saw the photos." Ariana blinked, but didn't deny it. "You want to talk about what you've done for me?" I continued, my voice still even. "You send me grocery lists, bills, school expenses, mortgage requests, and I pay, quietly, without asking anything." "That's what family does," Ariana snapped. "We help each other." "No," I said softly. "That's what mothers do, and I've done it for years." Ariana went silent. I looked at her a moment longer, then spoke slowly, like setting stones down on a table. "Your father built this house with his bare hands. He didn't have much, but he had pride. He taught you that respect is measured by actions, not words. And you couldn't even give him 2 hours to see him off one last time. That's not fair. Is it fair?" I stared straight at her. "You can say that? After you left him alone?" Ariana looked down at the floor. "So you're really cutting us out?" Ariana's voice grew smaller. "Just like that." "No," I said. "It's not that simple. I spent 20 years giving without receiving. I buried my husband alone. I sat by his grave and waited for you. You never came." I stopped and drew a deep breath. "That isn't just like that. That is an entire lifetime." Ariana folded her arms, trying to keep her composure, but her mouth was tight at the corners. "You're punishing us." "No, Ariana." I spoke slowly and clearly. "I'm freeing myself." Ariana curled her lip. "And giving everything to Malcolm." I didn't answer. Ariana laughed again, this time louder, as if she needed to stomp on the meaning of it all just to stay upright. "He's a kid. What does he know about responsibility?" I met her eyes. "He knows how to show up." There was a very strange moment after I said that. I watched Ariana freeze, not because I'd said something harsh, but because for the first time, someone had placed the simplest truth on the table, and it couldn't be twisted. But what I wasn't prepared for was that Ariana wouldn't leave in tears. She left with something else, wounded pride. And wounded pride, sometimes, is more dangerous than anger. The silence thickened like cotton. I had thought Ariana would cry. I had thought she would scream, but she didn't. Ariana only picked up her handbag, the way someone retrieves their dignity from the place they just dropped it. "Well," Ariana said, sliding on her sunglasses, "I hope this makes you feel powerful." "No," I replied calmly. "It makes me feel peaceful." Ariana walked out without another word. I waited until I heard her car pull away from the driveway before I lifted the trust papers from the dining table and set them beside the folded laundry. Everything in the house was still in its proper place, only the feeling had changed, as if an invisible string had just snapped. Later that night, I found a letter on the doorstep. No stamp, no envelope, just a crumpled sheet of paper, ink smeared as if it had been written in a rush. "You don't understand what balancing everything really looks like. We tried our best. Maybe we failed, but cutting us out like this isn't the answer." I read it twice. Then I folded it in half and put it into the drawer labeled miscellaneous, because that was what it had become now. Just another piece of paper. Too little. Too late. Damien came the next day. He didn't barge in like Ariana. He knocked twice, waited, then knocked again. Damien's knocking sounded so proper that I knew immediately. He had practiced. I opened the door slowly. I also knew he wouldn't come alone. And sure enough, behind Damien stood Simone, his wife, with that familiar stiff smile and a scarf far too expensive for the weather. Simone nodded at me as if I were a stranger she had agreed to see as a favor. "Mom," Damien said, his voice calm, rehearsed. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. Damien walked in, looking around the house as if he were moving through a museum of a life he no longer recognized. I led them into the living room. They didn't take off their coats. "I heard from Ariana," Damien began, "and from Malcolm." I figured. Damien cleared his throat like someone preparing to deliver a sentence meant to be remembered. "I think there may be a misunderstanding." I said nothing. Simone crossed her legs very lightly, very neatly. The diamonds on her finger caught the afternoon light, flashing in a way that made my skin crawl. "We understand this is a difficult time, Gloria," Simone said, her voice soft but sharp. "Emotions tend to run high after a loss." I looked straight at Simone. "You didn't come to his funeral either." Simone blinked once, then answered like someone who had prepared the line. "I had dinner with clients." "A very important deal. International." Damien shifted, as if he wanted to say something to salvage it, then thought better of it. "Mom, listen." Damien tried again, his voice lower. "I should have called. I should have come. I just didn't know how. I thought maybe—" "No," I interrupted. "You thought maybe if you ignored it long enough, it would become someone else's grief." Damien turned his face away. "I waited," I continued. "I sat in the room your father built with his own hands, alone, while they lowered him into the ground, and not one of you showed up." Damien opened his mouth, but Simone placed her hand on his knee, a silent signal, clear enough to mean, "Let me handle this." Simone turned back to me, her tone still icily reasonable. "We understand you're upset, and of course you have the right to change your will. But let's be realistic. Malcolm is a child. He's 19. "I know," I said. "Yes, but he has no experience," Simone continued. "He doesn't know how to handle a trust fund or manage assets. He could be taken advantage of." I raised an eyebrow. "By whom?" Simone didn't blink. "By people who know he's inheriting something valuable." I held Simone's gaze one beat longer. A single thought flickered through my mind. Like you. Damien tried to step in, as if pulling it back toward family would make it less naked. "Mom, I know I disappointed you. I know I haven't been the best son, but you have to admit, this is a little extreme." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What's extreme is abandoning your father. What's extreme is living like the people who raised you are disposable." Damien swallowed hard. "So that's it," Damien said. "You're just cutting us out." "You cut yourselves out," I said. "I'm only acknowledging the truth." Simone stood up. Her smile disappeared. Her voice dropped into something that sounded like a polite warning. "This could get complicated, Gloria. Legally." I lifted my eyes and met Simone's stare. "It won't," I said. "The paperwork is clear, my attorney is good, and I've had time to think." Damien looked at me like he was staring at someone he suddenly didn't recognize. He looked older than I remembered, thinner at the temples, hollow around the eyes. "You used to forgive everyone," Damien said, almost pleading. "I still forgive," I replied, "but forgiveness doesn't mean access." They didn't argue anymore. They stood, thanked me with a strained kind of politeness, and left. The door closed, and only then did I realize my hands were trembling. Not from fear, not from doubt, but from release. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the last light drain from the sky. The rose bushes outside were nearly bare. Winter was close. Calvin would have said, "They'll bloom again." And they would. But not for everyone. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I took out an old letter Calvin had written to me on his first business trip, kept in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. "Gloria, this house is never empty with you in it. You are the roof, the foundation, the lock on the door. Even when it feels like no one sees you, I see you." I read it 3 times, then slid it back into the envelope. The house was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. Outside the window, the Savannah wind moved softly through the moss-draped oak branches. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 8 times. I thought about Malcolm, about Damien and Ariana, about Calvin lying alone in Bonaventure Cemetery. And I knew, not hoped, but knew, that I had done the right thing. Not the easy thing, but the right thing. The bank smelled of lemon cleaner and a kind of quiet authority, the sort of place where old money moves slowly and no one needs to raise their voice for others to understand who is deciding what. I hadn't stepped in here in almost a year, and yet they still remembered me. "Mrs. Waverly," the receptionist said, standing up immediately. "Mr. Langford will be right out." I nodded politely and waited by the tall window overlooking Main Street. Outside, people hurried through their lives, heads down, steps quick. Inside, everything was so quiet, it felt as though something important was always about to happen here. A minute later, Marcus Langford stepped out. He looked as sharp as ever, in a perfectly fitted tailored suit. Marcus was the kind of man I was certain had never spilled coffee on his shirt in his entire life. "Gloria," he greeted me, shaking my hand with measured warmth. "I was quite surprised by your message." "Good," I said. "Surprise is good." Marcus smiled, a little unsure what that answer was pointing at, then led me into his office. Glass walls, a walnut desk, and only one framed photo, his dog. Calvin would have liked that. One honest face in a room full of numbers. Marcus opened my account file. "I understand you'd like to make some changes," he said. "I've already made them," I replied. "I'm here to make sure they're enforced and not delayed." He lowered his gaze to read the notes. As his eyes moved line by line, his eyebrows lifted noticeably. "You've revoked all linked transfers, removed Damien and Ariana from the beneficiary list, and established an irrevocable trust in Malcolm's name." Marcus looked up. "That's a significant change." I met his gaze. "I'm a significant woman," I said. Marcus let out a quiet laugh. "Yes, you are." I leaned forward slightly, not to pressure him, but to make sure he understood. I wasn't here to discuss this for entertainment. "I want safeguards, Marcus," I said. "Irreversible. No appeals. No family representatives twisting my grandson's arm 5 years from now when they suddenly realize they dropped something valuable." Marcus nodded, shifting into his professional tone. "We can structure the trust to prevent that. Distributions would be controlled and tied to purpose, education, housing, or medical, until he turns 30. After that, he can have full access, though certain protections can still remain." He paused. "Would you like a co-trustee?" "No," I answered immediately. "Malcolm can have a financial advisor if he wants. But the decisions are his. I trust him, more than I trust attorneys. That wasn't an insult to Marcus, just the truth. I had lived long enough to understand. Sometimes people are better at law than they are at right. Marcus adjusted his glasses. You understand this won't be easy to reverse. I looked at him, clear and decisive. I don't want it reversed. We reviewed everything, signatures, dates, final confirmations, step by step, carefully, like building something. Not a house, not a business, a boundary, something quieter, but stronger. A boundary that wouldn't bend to guilt, wouldn't soften with time, and wouldn't collapse just because someone showed up late with an apology. Before I left, Marcus folded his hands on the desk and tilted his head slightly. Gloria, if I may ask, and you absolutely have the right to say this is private, but are you doing this out of anger? I considered the question, not hurriedly, not defensively. No, I said, I'm doing this for clarity. Marcus nodded slowly. That's rare. No, I said again, softer this time. It's just late. When Marcus printed the final set of documents, he slid a thin stack toward me, and the moment I picked up the pen, a thought hit me so sharply my spine went cold. From here on out, Damien and Ariana wouldn't be asking anymore. They would be demanding. And when people start demanding what they believe belongs to them, they don't just use words, they use other methods. I didn't say it aloud. I simply signed. But in that moment, I understood. Walking out of the bank today wasn't the ending. It was the opening shot. When I stepped out into the afternoon light, everything suddenly felt different, cleaner, lighter, as if something in my chest had been lifted away. Across the street was a cafe Calvin and I used to stop by after errands. I hadn't gone in for years. The place had changed, staff younger, music louder, but I walked in anyway and ordered a cappuccino. I chose a table by the window facing the street. A woman in her 30s passed by outside, pushing a baby stroller, her coat flaring in the wind. She looked tired, determined, and strangely familiar. I sipped my coffee slowly. No phone in my hand, no urgency, just a chair, a cup, and an hour that belonged entirely to me. People always say this stage of life will be quiet. They don't mention that. Peace can be that loud. Denise Carmichael lived 2 houses down from me. She'd lived there since 1972. Denise and I weren't the kind of women who called each other best friends, but we had shared enough cups of tea, enough knowing looks over the fence, that silence between us became its own language. Around 5 o'clock, Denise knocked on my door, carrying a box of lemon cookies and that gentle, familiar kind of curiosity she always had. I saw Damien's car here yesterday, Denise said the moment I opened the door. Did he bring flowers or excuses? Neither, I replied, stepping aside to let her in. He brought his wife and a suit. Oh, Denise said exactly one word, but that "oh" was soaked in judgment. We sat in the living room. I poured tea, chamomile for Denise, strong black tea for me. Denise set the tin box between us on the coffee table, but didn't open it. She wasn't in a hurry. She waited, the way people wait for the truth. I told them, I said at last, everything, that they've been cut out of the will, and Malcolm is the only one who came back without needing to be asked. Denise let out a long breath, as if she'd been holding it for years. Finally, it's time. I looked at her. I'm sorry, Gloria, Denise said, her voice gentler, but I've watched you chase their approval for years, skipping your own doctor appointments, writing checks while they went on cruises, smiling when they forgot your birthday. Denise shook her head. I kept thinking, one day she'll explode, and thank God, you finally did. I didn't explode, I said. I just stripped away everything that wasn't love. Denise smiled. Better said. We sat quietly for a moment. In the house, there was only the faint hum of the refrigerator, and now and then the wind on the porch. Autumn had settled in, the kind that smells like old leaves and feels like standing on the edge of something closing. "Do you regret it?" Denise asked finally. I shook my head. "I only regret not doing it sooner." Denise opened the tin. The cookies were perfect, crisp sugared edges, soft buttery centers. We each took one and chewed slowly, like chewing through a chapter of life. "You know," Denise said, "my granddaughter tried to talk me into selling this house last spring. She said it's too big, that I should move into some luxury apartment complex by the lake." "Everything is taken care of for you, Auntie," Denise mimicked her granddaughter's voice. "Laundry, meals, even group trips." "And what did you say?" I asked. I told her I'd rather die in a house full of chipped porcelain cups and my own silence than live in a place that smells like disinfectant and someone else's boredom. I laughed, a small laugh, but real. It came from something solid inside me, like an anchor. Denise leaned forward, her tone dropping. "You and I," Denise said, "we come from a generation that knows what endurance costs. We grind down our spines. We raise people who think love is measured in gifts. And gratitude is optional." I nodded. "You're not cruel, Gloria," Denise added. "They'll say you are. They'll whisper things like, 'She cut off her own children.' But what they won't say is that you're also the one who kept them afloat through every storm, even when they couldn't be bothered to ask whether you were sinking." We talked for another hour about Denise's garden, the state of the neighborhood, and the squirrels chewing through her gutter again. When Denise stood to leave, I hugged her longer than usual. "Thank you for coming," I whispered. "Always," Denise said. That night, I didn't turn on the television. I took out an old letter Calvin had written to me in the early days of his business, kept in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. I read it 3 times, then slid it back into the envelope. The house was still quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. And for the first time since the funeral, I no longer felt a heavy weight pressed on my chest, only the shape of what was coming. Something Malcolm would build. Something I had just made space for. I didn't expect her. When I opened the door and saw Simone standing there, alone, with no car in sight, no Damien trailing behind with an apology rehearsed in the mirror, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She was holding a cake, a store-bought cake. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled nervously. "Apple." I stepped aside, not out of kindness, not out of obligation, only out of curiosity. She walked in like someone who had been here before, but had never really looked around. Her eyes swept across the hallway, the photos, the coat rack Calvin built in 1981, the one Damien had broken a peg on when he was little and then lied about it. Calvin never fixed it. He said it was part of the story now. Simone stood awkwardly in the kitchen. I didn't offer her tea, I didn't tell her to sit. I let the silence do its work. Finally, she said, "I'm not here to ask for anything." "Good. I heard what happened. What Gloria said to Damien about the trust, the house, everything." I nodded. "I know you probably don't trust me," she continued, her hands now clasped tightly in front of her. "But I wanted to say thank you." That caught me off guard. "Thank you for what, exactly?" "For not leaving it to Damien." She lifted her gaze, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, I saw something real, unfiltered, uncalculated. "Damien never learned how to stand on his own feet," she said. "He grew up with everything handled for him. I tried to keep that illusion going, but—" She stopped, her eyes now speckled with moisture. "Your support didn't help, but neither did I. And now this is simply who he is." I didn't speak. She went on. "I know he blames you, and Ariana blames you. But what they won't say is that you were the one holding everything together while they complained about the way you did it." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired too," she whispered. We stood in that quiet kitchen for a long time. No one moved. The cake sat untouched between us. Finally, she sat down. "I want you to know I admired Calvin," she said. "He was kind to me, even when he had no reason to be. And I know I never said thank you for everything you've done, the help, the money, the babysitting, constantly. Yes. I looked at her now, the folding long finished. You don't owe me a thank you, but you owed him your presence when he left this world, and you didn't come. She looked down. I know. There was no satisfaction in saying it, only truth, like brushing dust off a windowsill. She reached into her handbag, not to leave, but to take something out. A small photograph, worn at the edges. It was Malcolm, maybe 5 years old, sitting on the backyard swing. I had taken that picture on a Sunday. Simone must have pulled it from one of the Christmas cards I'd sent years ago. He loves you, she said. You know that, right? I nodded. I hope one day he loves someone like that, she added, and I hope he knows how rare that is. She stood, smoothing her coat. I won't take any more of your time, she said. But I wanted to say it before the story gets rewritten, before they turn you into the villain in their version. She walked to the door and opened it herself. The wind caught the edge of her scarf. For a moment, she looked younger, less polished, just a woman who had also spent her life giving herself away to people who never truly saw it. She paused on the threshold. Don't let them take your peace, Gloria, she said. They've taken enough already. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time before I picked up the cake and put it in the refrigerator, not out of sentiment, just because it would taste good with tea tomorrow. A week later, I received a letter from the attorney. Not urgent, just confirmation. The new documents had been filed. The trust was active. Malcolm's name now existed on every paper, every account, every line where Damien's and Ariana's names used to be. It felt quiet, not like victory, not like drama, just solid, like a book finally being closed after sitting open too long, pages curling in the air. I carried the envelope into the garden. The rose bushes had finally surrendered to the cold. Calvin used to say, they surrender with dignity. And I always liked that phrase. Now I understood what he meant. There is a way to let go that doesn't look like failure. The envelope had my grandson's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, slanted slightly, careful print with uneven spacing. Malcolm always pressed too hard with the pen, as if the words wouldn't count unless they left an imprint. It arrived 3 days after our conversation, tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while the kettle boiled. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there the way I used to let unopened birthday cards rest on the mantel until after dinner, stretching out the mystery. When the tea was ready, I sat down and opened the envelope. Dear Grandma Gloria, I wanted to write this instead of texting. I know I could have said this the last time I saw you, but I was still trying to find the right words. And now, after thinking about it for a few days, I don't think there are perfect words. So these are honest ones. Thank you. Not just for the trust or the house or the cabin, even though I know how big that is, but for something else. For being the only person in this family who never asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. You always made space for me. Even when my parents were pushing me to be more polished, more ambitious, more strategic. You were never strategic. You were just real. I didn't know Grandpa was sick. I didn't know he died. I still don't really know how to deal with that. And I'm so angry at Mom for not telling me, for deciding it didn't matter. I was there. You know I was there. And I'm so sorry. I don't know what made you choose me, but I promise I won't let you down. I won't waste it. I want to take care of this house, Grandma. I want to learn what you and Grandpa built. I want to understand what kind of strength it takes to keep showing up when no one else does. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I always have. Malcolm. I read it 3 times, once with dry eyes, once with my hand on my chest, once with quiet tears sliding down my jaw. Then I set the letter on the mantel and stood in front of it like it was something sacred. Because in this house, letters like that are rare. Not because love doesn't exist, but because it has gone too long unsaid, assumed, stretched thin. I didn't need the money I'd saved. Not anymore. But I needed this. I needed to know that something I'd done, a small, quiet investment of time and tenderness, hadn't been completely swallowed by ungrateful children and performative holidays. I needed to know that real love still recognized itself. That night, I sat in Calvin's chair and watched the darkness move across the floor as the sun set behind the maple trees in Savannah. Malcolm was the kind of person Calvin would have respected, not loud, not entitled, but steady, curious, present. That last part mattered more than anything now. Present. Not just showing up, but seeing. I knew he wouldn't waste the trust, not because of the money, because he had tasted what it meant to be forgotten. And people like that don't let things rot in silence. He would plant something with it. He would remember. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft creaking of the house as the temperature dropped. The wood shifted, settled, breathed. It was a sound I once mistook for loneliness. Now it sounded like life continuing, like a legacy whispering back. Mornings had a new rhythm now. No more calls from Ariana asking if I could just swing by Malcolm's school. Not because she needed me, but because her yoga class ran long. No more texts from Damien that started polite and ended with a line that made it impossible to refuse. Would I mind covering an unexpected car repair, never urgent enough to justify panic, but always urgent enough to apply pressure? And strangely, after a while, that silence stopped being frightening. It became gentle. That night, I set the table for one. Not because I was lonely, but because I finally understood the difference between eating and being nourished. I roasted chicken, real chicken, not frozen, not microwaved, with potatoes. I sprinkled parsley from the garden, the same parsley Calvin had planted back in the years when we still believed weekends were for laughter, not just errands and bills. I lit a candle. I didn't need it, but I wanted it. In the middle of dinner, the house was so quiet I could hear the hallway clock ticking. I remembered that clock from the first apartment Calvin and I ever rented. It used to be so loud it annoyed us when we lay awake at night. No money, no insurance, no real plan, except each other. Calvin used to say, "We'll build something, even if it's slow." And it was slow. But it was beautiful. After dinner, I washed dishes carefully. No rushing, no multitasking, no thinking about whether someone was waiting to come into the kitchen after me. I dried each one, put it away, and then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I danced. Not well, not long, but enough. I turned on the old record player, the one Calvin tried to fix 100 times, until he gave up and told me, "It has more charm, with the scratches." He was right. It skipped every third line, and I still knew the lyrics. I danced barefoot in the living room, my hands slightly raised, my body stiff in places I didn't remember being stiff. My knees reminded me I was 79, but my heart was 20 again. I danced like no one was watching, because for the first time, truly, no one was watching. Not to judge, not to measure me against expectations, not to wait for me to stop so they could hand me a bill, a need, a favor, just me, in the house I had kept, in the quiet I had created. I only stopped when I looked at the fireplace. It was cold, unused for a long time, a layer of ash still left from the last winter. Calvin was alive. I knelt and cleaned it carefully, sweeping away the old. It felt like a ritual, like something sacred. And then I saw it, a small slip of paper tucked in the wood basket I hadn't touched in years. Calvin's handwriting, short, simple. "Keep dancing, even if it's only in the kitchen. The world will try to make you forget who you are. Don't let it." I sat right there, ash dusting my hands, my eyes burning. Tears rose but didn't fall. Calvin had known. Maybe he didn't know exactly how everything would unfold, but he knew what life would try to do to me. It would try to make me smaller, politer, easier, until one day I disappeared without anyone noticing, and he left that note like a marker on the road so I could find myself again. I thought that would be the most beautiful closing moment, but there was something I hadn't told you. The next morning, when I folded Calvin's note and slipped it into my pocket, a thought flashed through me, cold and clear as winter wind. If Calvin left this message, that means he had seen me being pulled away from myself, and if he had seen it, then he must have seen who was pulling. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, doing nothing at all, just listening to the house breathe. Then the doorbell rang. Malcolm came exactly as he'd promised. Saturday morning, right at 9, he knocked, carrying a bag of groceries I hadn't asked for. "I figured you might need a few fresh things," he said, as naturally as if that were the most obvious thing in the world. I smiled. "Do you want to learn to cook some of these today?" "Yes," he said. "I do." We cooked together. I showed him how to flip pancakes without tearing them, how to test pan heat with a drop of water, how to fold batter without knocking the air out of it. Malcolm listened, really listened, not like Damien used to. Damien was always impatient, always looking for shortcuts, as if everything were a race only he knew the rules to. "You're good at this," Malcolm said, taking his first bite. "I've had time to practice," I replied. Malcolm poured on more syrup and grinned. "You know," he said, then hesitated as if weighing something bigger, "I think this place could become something." I looked at him. "The house," Malcolm said. "I don't just mean keeping it, I mean using it. Maybe for other people, like a space for those who don't have anywhere to go, or even a small garden workshop, teaching people things." Something opened inside me, like a door I'd thought had been locked a long time ago. Hope, not loud, not desperate, soft, patient. "Grandpa would have liked that," I said. Malcolm nodded. "Maybe I'll start with the porch. It needs fixing." "You'll need real tools," I said, narrowing my eyes. "Not those student kits in plastic boxes." Malcolm laughed. "Then you'll have to teach me that too." We ate the rest in an easy, comfortable silence. After Malcolm left, I stood at the sink, washing dishes, the window open, new curtains shifting softly. The wind carried the smell of dry leaves and something vaguely sweet. Maybe cinnamon, maybe memory. I looked out into the yard. The roses were past their season. The bench was cold. The trees were bare but still upright. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel a weight pressing down on me anymore. Only the shape of what came next. Something Malcolm would build. Something I had made space for. The first snow fell like dust. A thin white veil over the yard, not enough to stick, but enough to announce the season had truly changed. I stood on the back porch, wrapped in a thick sweater, coffee in hand, watching the flakes blur into the wind. Malcolm was out front, measuring the steps with a small level, murmuring to himself the way Calvin used to when he worked. It had been a month since I signed the papers. The world didn't clap. The sky didn't open. But something in me had changed. A weight I'd carried for decades had finally vanished. And what replaced it wasn't anger. It wasn't triumph. It was space. The kids didn't call back. Ariana sent one text, a single line. "I hope you're proud of what you did." I didn't answer. Damien's silence was longer, deeper, a void that used to demand I fill it. I didn't chase them. Let them tell their version. Let them redraw the truth until it fits their shame. But I knew what happened. I knew what I'd given, and I knew what I'd taken back. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand. Malcolm tapped lightly on the back door. "Grandma, do you want to see the new railing?" I set my cup down and followed him out front. He'd done well, sanding, staining, sealing against weather. For the first time in years, the porch looked like someone truly cared. "Grandpa would have said it's leaning a little to the left," I smiled. Malcolm grinned. "Then it's like everyone in this family." I laughed, loud, open, a laugh that hadn't lived in me for a long time. Malcolm stood beside me, wiping his hands on a towel. "I've been thinking, maybe in spring we can start a little garden out front. Not just flowers, vegetables, herbs, something that grows." I looked at Malcolm, and I didn't just see the boy I used to hold. I saw the man who chose to show up. "That sounds right," I said. We went back inside as the cold began to bite. I made soup. Malcolm fixed the sticking cabinet door. I showed him the fuse box. He asked about insulating the attic. We filled the day with small, necessary things, the kinds of things that make a life, not the kind you take pictures of to post, the kind you remember when they're gone. That night, after Malcolm left, I wrote another letter. Not for court, not for lawyers, for myself. To the woman I used to be. You tried longer than you should have. You bent yourself into shapes that didn't fit. You spoke softly when you should have stood straight. You gave when you should have said no. But you also loved fiercely, and that was not a mistake. Now, you are free. Free to dance in the kitchen. Free to plant something just because you want to see it grow. Free to say no without guilt. Free to say yes without fear. Free to give when it's deserved, not when it's demanded. You are not cruel. You are not bitter. You are simply clear. And finally, that is enough. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where I used to keep old family photos. Not to hide it, just to know it was there, like a lighthouse I built for myself. Before bed, I stepped outside one more time. The stars were sharper, the cold deeper. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "He would have been proud." Not because of the decision, not exactly because of the strength, but because at last I chose peace, not loud, not performative, just mine. And this is what I leave you with, if you've stayed this far. You might have your own silences, your own painful rooms, your own boundaries you've never said out loud. Don't wait for someone else to hand you peace. Choose it. Don't confuse love with obligation. Don't confuse duty with worth. And if your home is full of noise, but no one truly hears you, create a new kind of silence, a place where you're no longer invisible, a place where you don't have to disappear to feel safe. If this story touched something deep in you, share it. Tell a friend, or hold it close and remember, it is never too late to come back to yourself. And if you want to keep walking with me through stories like this, stories of betrayal, boundaries, and healing, then subscribe to the channel right now, because in the next part, it won't stop at peace. It will be the moment the people who forgot me finally realize what they lost.